Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's time for the view from the opposition, and it's a rare one this week. It comes in person in the studio. I'm Andrew Musgrove, and I'm joined by one of my Chronicle Live colleagues, Owen Younger. Now, I have to say, unfortunately, he is a Manchester United fan. He's very kindly come on to the podcast to share the insight into the chaotic nature of the Red Devils, and it is very chaotic at the moment. You can hear him sighing in the background, and he does get some stick in the office for being a Manchester United fan. I'm quite enjoying the chaotic nature at the moment of the club. Hopefully it continues on Wednesday night. Thank you for putting onto the podcast. You
No,
well?
thank you. Thanks for having us. I appreciate it.
You just come back from covering Gateshead at Wembley.
Yeah, no, that was amazing. It was a really good weekend. It was one of those where I sort of wasn't sure whether I'd actually get the opportunity to go, but obviously covering that, seeing them win as well, was brilliant. Because I mean, I am from Gateshead originally, as much as obviously I am a Man United fan, as you say, through my dad. Just before anyone starts to say it was kind of one of those glory hunting decisions here, but yeah, my dad was, and so I am as well.
And just for those who think they might recognise Owen, if you're a regular viewer of our website, Owen has the best job possibly at the Chronicle, aside from my job hosting this wonderful podcast. He gets to try like loads of different things. So he goes around the Granger Market trying all the wonderful food stalls. He stops in fancy hotels and tries the plunge pools. It's not a bad little gig, is it?
No, it's decent. I mean, someone's got to do it, I suppose. It's it's one of them where I think you kind of if you're given those opportunities, you're not going to sort of turn them down. But yeah, it's been great. It's kind of, I guess, it's about carving out a niche for yourself, isn't it? And sort of going and visiting all these places. But yeah, it's been really fun. I'm glad I'm staying here long term now, and that's brilliant.
Yeah, great addition to the team. And so the pain does come when you support Manchester United,
It does, yeah.
and things are not going particularly well at the moment. If they finish 8th, it'll be their lowest ever finish in the Premier League, won't it? How are you feeling about Wednesday night? Because I think Newcastle fans are a bit up and down the performance and result against Brighton 1-1 on Saturday. We would have loved a victory. We would have loved to see the home campaign off in style and go down into Old Trafford with a bit of a bounce. That bounce isn't quite there, but I do still think Newcastle go in as favourites. I'm feeling quite confident. Yeah. From a Manchester United perspective, how are you feeling?
I think I would agree that Newcastle are the favourites. I think it's one of those where the sort of the way that both teams have been playing going into the game. I mean, especially sort of the last kind of 4 or 5 Man United games. I think maybe before the Arsenal game, because that was, at least from watching that, it felt like a little bit of an improvement. I mean, I feel like a lot of the times this season I have been clutching at straws in terms of trying to find positives, but I definitely think that game against Arsenal, I know Sofian Amrabat had a really good game. I feel like he's barely played for us before that, but I thought he was impressive in midfield, and there was definitely a level of togetherness and fight, which I think I hadn't seen for a while before that, especially in the previous game against Crystal Palace. But yeah, it's one. I think it's a bit of a mix as well, because of the fact that obviously we don't know about both Bruno Fernandes and Marcus Rashford. I think both of those those could be available, and they're both game changers when they're on their game. So I think if depending on whether they're available or not, could make a huge difference.
Yeah, well, now we're recording this just before Erik ten Hag's press conference. We're recording this on the Tuesday afternoon. You'll be hearing it on the Wednesday morning. So in there, you could share some team news. But do you think, just on Bruno Fernandes and Marcus Rashford, you've got the FA Cup final coming up on the May the 25th. Do you think he'll risk those two players for the last 2 games of the Premier League season and risk potentially aggravating an injury and missing the FA Cup final against City?
I think it's a different case for both players. I think with Bruno specifically, it's his hand. I believe he broke his hand in a game a few games ago now, and I think he's one where if he could play, he'd be playing. I mean, he definitely seems like the type where, I think that was the Palace game was the first game he'd missed through injury in his entire 12-year career. Just hundreds of games that he's not missed, and I think he's one where if he can play, he will be on the pitch. But I think with Rashford, it's different, with it being he's got more of a history of long-term injuries with his back and things like that. So I think if I was to say that, I think Bruno could be risked in terms of if he is available, then he would be more likely to be there. But I also think I mean, obviously, if the two of them are there, great. I'd much prefer that. But out of the two, I'd say maybe Bruno's the more likely. But I mean, I get your point, because it is such a huge game coming up, and you would think if they were to prioritise anything at this point, being in the situation they are, it would be that FA Cup final.
But I guess, given the pressure on Erik ten Hag, given that this game is at home against the team 2 places above you, fighting for that place in Europe, he cannot afford to really lose on Wednesday, can he?
No. Well, I mean, in terms of the league situation, obviously we're 3 points behind Newcastle and behind Chelsea. Both have much better goal differences, so it really, a win's the only thing that keeps us in that fight for, definitely for the Europa League and also for the Conference League, depending on what happens in Chelsea's game against Brighton as well. So I think it's one where it feels like, as much as a game has been this season, a must win. So I think it's just really down to whether obviously whether they can get that job done. I mean, personally, I'm not sure whether I can necessarily see it being a sort of a clean sheet win or something like that, because I think it's one where the defense has been so up and down with all the injuries, obviously with Casemiro having to play there, and there's been so many players out of position that I don't think I could see Newcastle not scoring. That's my kind of my main sort of prediction going into it, I think.
Don't worry, we'll get on to Casemiro playing centre back. It's coming. Just in terms of that must win kind of view of the game on Wednesday, how did they handle that pressure? Because looking from the outside in, Old Trafford, it isn't a place you fear anymore going to, and if anything, it's a worse place to play for Manchester United, because you feel Newcastle get just an early chance, not even an early goal, just an early chance, or they put in a really hard challenge. The crowd maybe start to turn. If it starts to rain and they haven't fixed the roof, that's
exactly.
going to add to
that
things.
was the point I was going to make. Yeah, I mean that if anything sums up the sort of the trials and tribulations that they've had. I mean that sort of waterfall scene from that game. I mean, it's one of those where it's sort of, there's never been a more kind of poignant reminder of the situation that the club's in, I think, in terms of from a financial perspective, from a perspective of sort of the infrastructure of everything, from obviously the owners down, basically, in terms of the stadium itself. I think a lot of the players as well, that I mean, the recruitment for the last 10 years has been abysmal, to be honest. I mean, it's sort of, you've maybe had 1 in 5 players who's been relatively successful in terms of they've stayed there for a long time and at least kind of not flopped in a couple of seasons and been moved on for much less money, because I feel like that is again another systematic failing. But it's one of those things where, like you said, it is such a difficult place to play as a Man United player. I think it used to be sort of, I mean, you're only really going back 10-15 years when you're looking at the fact that it was, like you said, it was such a difficult place to come, and it was one of those places where teams would fear coming. And I think it feels like how rapidly that's actually changed in the last decade has been sort of obviously very bad to see from my situation. But you can imagine from other clubs coming, it's sort of, you feel like you can get something now because so many teams have gone and got something.
So I will handle that must-win aspect, because against Arsenal, you could argue that it was a free shot in many ways. And they did. They performed all right. But as I said in the match preview with John Gibson, watching that game, you felt like Arsenal didn't really push them too much. They got the 1 goal lead. They wanted to protect that.
They weren't threatened, really, I don't think, Arsenal.
So they didn't want to leave themselves open to maybe an equaliser or even a defeat. Whereas, there will be an expectation, I think, from certain sections of the Manchester United fan base that you should be beating Newcastle in your own backyard. So how does Erik ten Hag, with all that external pressure as well, how did him and his players handle that so-called must-win aspect?
I mean, I think it's one of those where the first thing that has to come for me as a fan watching is the togetherness, and is that sort of that collective. I mean, not even necessarily when you see it on the pitch. I mean, just you think of the changing rooms beforehand, the sort of collective. Everyone's together, everyone's going out with the same goal, and sort of no one's going into business for themselves and sort of and trying to almost make themselves look good. Because I think there's been an element of that with some of the Manchester United attacking players this season, where it's been more of a situation of it feels more like, oh, we're trying to score a goal, we're trying to get an assist, we're trying to boost our numbers, rather than necessarily playing for the team. And I think that's the key thing that Ten Hag needs to get across is we're a collective, and most of you will probably still be here next season, or a good proportion of you will still be here. So we want to put ourselves in the best position possible to kick on next season, because I think obviously there was the positive time with the sort of half new ownership, I guess, and that kind of thought, oh, it was sort of, I think we were playing all right at that point as well, and then things dipped, and all of a sudden it's a thing of, well, I think fans now are waiting for things to happen quicker than they would have been otherwise. So I think in terms of the sort of end of this season and kind of getting themselves into some form of European competition has that sort of extra importance, really.
Is Europe something you definitely want? I've seen a few people suggesting. I've seen a few people suggesting from a Newcastle point of view that actually not having Europe allows you to have a better shot at the top four, maybe even a title push. From a Newcastle point of view, you want European football, no matter if it's the Conference League or it's the Europa League. You want that European spot. From Manchester United point of view, is it something that you definitely want?
It's a hard one, I think, because it's sort of like you, as a Man United fan, obviously, I sort of grew up kind of in the early 2000s to sort of mid 2000s era, the Sir Alex Ferguson era, in terms of I remember watching the Champions League success, the penalties. I actually remember hiding behind the sofa during that penalty shootout. I couldn't watch as a young lad, but yeah, that was one of those situations, I think, where you kind of saw that, like I said, that togetherness in the team. And I guess in terms of European football, it feels like we've been in the Europa League over the last 10 years as much as we've actually been in the Champions League. So, I mean, that feels like it's actually become a bit of a competition we've become quite accustomed to. And it's one of those where I could understand kind of the perspective of, obviously, like you said, not wanting to be in Europe, not wanting to have those extra games, especially Thursday games, I think as well have an even bigger impact. But I also think it's one where, with the Conference League, for example, it's a competition that would never have been in before. And it's a situation where you think it's a chance to win a trophy that they've never won before, which isn't something that comes along very often. I mean, obviously the Europa League, there was that when it was won under Mourinho, and it's one of those where it's interesting. I think that you could think, oh well, maybe if we were to get into the Europa League or the Conference League, it gives us an option at a trophy which we wouldn't have, because I think it's Roy Keane who always says that at this point Manchester United are a cup team, and that's where they can find success. I mean, they haven't been close to a league title in a number of years, so I think being in as many competitions as possible is good in terms of obviously having the opportunities to win them. But then I do also get that point of it's you have seen teams be successful when they haven't been in Europe and get up. So I think it's a bit of a mixed bag in terms of the way I feel about that, I think.
So at the moment, 7th place doesn't have European football because it relies on Man City beating Manchester United in the FA Cup final, and then everything gets moved up one. We talked there about the form of fear factor of Old Trafford, and if you look at the form, the last 6 games at home, Manchester United lie 12th in the form table when it comes to home games. 1-2, drawn 2, lost 2. Scored 10, conceded 8. I mean, Manchester United, as we've said, that they used to be top with the form table when it comes to home games, nearly all the time. Newcastle's away form. Now, if you'd come to me 2 months ago, I would have been going, "Oh my God!" But actually, Newcastle are 5th in the form table when it comes to away games. Last 6, won 3, lost 3, scored 11, conceded 12. So their home form's definitely picked up. And I'm looking forward to this game.
Yeah.
Do you look at Newcastle United and you have a little bit of fear?
I mean, I think it's one of those things where the job that Eddie Howe's done is looking at it from an outside perspective has been nothing short of incredible. I mean, it's considering that he's had to work with essentially the same squad that was still there when Steve Bruce was there, and he's had to sort of take a lot of those players and improve them, and I mean, with obviously players like Joe, he's really done that, and I think it's interesting because obviously there was that kind of that real the huge positive of getting into the Champions League last season, and it obviously feels like this season's been a bit more up and down in terms of obviously there was the group stage exit, but then also there's been an upturn in form in terms of in the league recently. So I think it's one where this maybe feels like almost a bit of a transitional season for Newcastle in terms of they have that kind of the hope of still getting into Europe at this point, but they're kind of not pushing into the Champions League in the same way. I mean, I remember even I think it was this time last season, it was the second last game or the last game where it was between Man United and Newcastle who would actually be finishing third. I think obviously they both had the Champions League pretty much sorted by that point, but it always seems like the two clubs these days are quite close and always quite kind of battling on a level playing field, which obviously hasn't been the case for a while before that.
It's interesting you mentioned that because I remember that time last season when Man United did finally finish third and there was so much chat about, we'll be title challengers next year, etc., etc. Whereas with Newcastle, I don't think too many people knew what the expectation was this season. I think there was probably an acceptance that Champions League football would hit the squad. So actually, from when Newcastle were at the turn of the year to have a chance of finishing 6th, 7th, if it becomes a European spot, is absolutely fantastic. With Manchester United, I think there'll be and correct me if I'm wrong, but is there a massive kind of sense of disappointment that it is only 6th or 7th?
I'd say so. Yeah, I think it's one of those where I think I'm trying to think where we were really as high as this season. I mean, we've never looked like obviously challenging City and Arsenal, and obviously before that Liverpool as well. But I can definitely remember times when we were kind of around that 4th, 5th spot, and in similar positions to Villa and Spurs, who have obviously ended up kind of getting above that and out of the line of fire of the teams below them. But I mean, it is one of those where I think you can look back on a lot of moments and a lot of games where there's been individual errors. I mean, I think the Champions League group stage is a great example of that. I mean, obviously, I mean, personally, I do quite like Andre Onana as a goalkeeper. I think he's one that could be successful. I just think you can't ignore the amount of mistakes that he's made this season, especially that early part during the Champions League group stages. And there's other things. I mean, there was defensive errors. There was a lot of talk about midfielders. I mean, someone like an Antony, for example, not tracking back and not having anywhere near the impact he should be for the money was spent on him. I think that's what it comes back to a lot is you looked at the squad at the end of last season compared to what they had. I mean, there was improvements made in terms of the players they brought in, or at least it seemed like there was going to be. And it feels like those players have either been injured a lot or haven't performed, and it's actually more. It's taken a step backwards more than there's been improvement. So I think the positivity that there was at the end of last season, and also sort of as this season began, it's very much waned over the last few months.
And I wonder if that kind of attitude that maybe the Conference League or Europa League is beneath Manchester United, that might have an impact on Wednesday. Because I think for Newcastle and anyhow, they really want this European football, and they'll take it whatever competition is. And I think it's all going to be about application and attitude. Come on then, speak to me about Casemiro, because as I said to John Gibson in the match preview, after watching Palace absolutely decimate him, I said there's not a chance that he can play in the same position again. And he did, didn't he, against Arsenal?
He did, yeah.
Will he play the same two at the back against Newcastle? He can't.
Well, that's my thinking, is that surely it gets to the point where you have to change something. And I think Willy Kambala has just come back from injury. He was actually doing quite well for us before he got that injury. He was coming off the bench. He seemed to be quite a good kind of promising young centre back. So I mean, if I was Ten Hag, put myself in that position, I think I would just be prioritising playing two actual centre backs in that position. And I think as well, I mean, I would potentially be thinking about, because I know I mentioned before that Sofian Amrabat had a good game against Arsenal, so I would maybe be thinking about a potential Casemiro Amrabat pivot in there. I think could be something that they could do if obviously if Ten Hag was willing to put Kambala in from the start, or potentially do something else at centre back. Potentially McTominay, I know people talked about. He plays there for Scotland, so I think that's a potential as well. But I just think it's one of those where the team will really change depending on the injury news when it comes to Rashford and Bruno. I mean, that was the issue against Arsenal. The structure was good. The sort of defensively, I thought we were okay, but it was apart from that one kind of individual error. But it was really the creativity that just wasn't there. And I think we've been a team since Bruno arrived, really, that has relied on him almost solely for creativity. So I think when he's not there, which has been rare, but when he's not there, it's non-existent, it feels like.
Yeah, I think when we talk about the fear factor, the one fear factor for me that is always there is Bruno Fernandes. Yeah. I just think
you can just pop up, can't you, and do something sort of completely out of the ordinary. I mean, the thing with him, which I think I like so much, is that you can be watching him and almost be thinking he's not having a good game, he's not getting into the game, but you just think, well, just wait a sec, because he could do something, and he usually does. There's usually something from him. I mean, especially before this injury, he sort of was, when we were winning games, which was sort of, I would say maybe half the time, he was actually the person that was the main reason why we were winning those games. So I think missing him's been massive, and I'm hoping he's back, but I can definitely understand Newcastle fans hoping that he's still going to be out for a little bit.
I mean, we've only won 2 in the last 10 games, so Newcastle have won 6 in that time. So I mean, on form and on paper, this should be a Newcastle United win, but things never are as simple as that. So you think that maybe it'll be Evans and
Kambala would be that would be what I would choose to do, I think, if I was in that situation. But I just think it's difficult because of the fact that I think obviously Casemiro should play. I think when he's played in his position this season, he's been quite good. I think he's sort of, especially when he's had a good midfield around him. He's had Bruno and I think usually potentially McTominay next to him. That's kind of been a good sort of position for him to be in, and with a good defense behind him when Martinez has been fit, when Varane's been fit. But it's just there's been so many, specifically defensive injuries. I know obviously there's the sort of all the injuries Newcastle have had as well in terms of the amount of them. I think with Man United, it's been more of a case of it's been the same area of the pitch that's been getting hit. It's been kind of I think we've had we've got all, essentially it feels like all 4 centre backs out, because Evans wouldn't have been in the picture if you'd asked me last summer. Obviously that was an emergency pickup when we needed him, but it is one of those, I think, where it's kind of been that specific defensive area that's been hit. Obviously Luke Shaw's been out for a while, Malacia has been out for months, so that's one of those where it's kind of like we've been forced into playing Casemiro there. But I think if you do have another central defender like a Willy Kambala, who has played quite well when I've watched him, I think you have to do that, because I think just having someone with that positional sense and someone who knows how to play as a centre back and has done that for years is more important for me than playing your most experienced player in that position, which he's not. Well, he's shown that he's not
Doesn't
particularly
look
great.
comfortable, does he? I mean, the one thing I'll give you hope is that Wilson and Isak potentially are doubts for Wednesday.
The illness,
both illness. That missed. Well, Isak played against Brighton, but you could tell he wasn't himself. Came off. Wilson was missing through illness and a bit of tightness as well. But you know,
I was going to say, with what Gordon can do through the middle, I mean that still is really gives you guys an option in terms of what you can.
Well, you and I and Stokes agree. I don't like to see Gordon in the middle. I mean, obviously, if it's needed, he will be playing up front. He's so much more influential out on the flank. I think Isak will start on Wednesday. Eddie Howe said, fingers crossed, he can train today. He didn't train on Monday. We're recording this on Tuesday. He said, hopefully he can train today. Might have Fabian Schär back as well, which would be a huge boost. It's centre back. And you just feel like this is a game for someone like Bruno Guimaraes to start. Plenty of speculation about his future, the way he was on Saturday after the game, looking very despondent. But I think in a big arena, as much as it's falling apart, this is kind of a game for Bruno to really show what he can do in front of a massive audience.
And I think it's one where I think from the sort of the perspective of a Bruno as well, or an Isak, I know there's been talk of, obviously, I think it would have been hard for them to sort of hard to say that they should necessarily both be thinking, oh yeah, we will be getting into the Champions League again next year. Looking at the squad that they had around them in terms of the lack of numbers in some ways, the lack of kind of options like them who have been brought in just because Newcastle haven't had the sort of ability to be able to do that with financial fair play. So I think it's one of those where they will be looking around thinking, long term, this is looking very good. I mean, I know I was looking at what Fabrizio Romano was saying about the 2 centre backs, Lloyd Kelly and Adebayo as well. I mean, if that was me as a Man United fan thinking, why aren't we doing that? I think we're always so we lack that kind of proactiveness in the transfer market of all of a sudden it feels like sometimes with Man United there's a case of something will happen or there'll be talk of someone being interested in someone and we'll jump on that and see if we can get in there, and it's one of those, and the price will get pushed up and everything. But I think it's been great to see from a Newcastle perspective how proactive they've been in the transfer market and getting things done early. So I think those two could be huge additions if they do come in, and they would further strengthen that squad and would hopefully convince the likes of Bruno and Isak to think, yes, we're staying. And obviously there's the new contract for Isak, but it will sort of, you'd hope those bigger players
adds depth, doesn't it?
The world class players will hopefully be there thinking, we're committed now.
And those two potential rivals been done without a director of football because Manchester United have tempted Dan Ashworth to Old Trafford. Dan Ashworth derby.
Because he's on his holidays at the minute, but yeah, maybe he'll get there at some point.
I'm not sure his garden would have enjoyed all the rain this week.
No.
And just briefly, because I just want to ask you about how Man United play, just on Sir Jim Ratcliffe and his desire for a Wembley of the North to use my wonderful taxes to pay for it. You on board with that?
I mean, it's a funny one because it's like, obviously as a Man United fan, I'm thinking yes, that it would be very good in terms of
we can sign an extra striker and not have to worry about paying for the stadium.
Exactly. From that perspective, it's fair enough. But I think it's for me as someone who's been to Old Trafford a number of times and sort of has seen that stadium. I mean, I would say do everything you can to try and make Old Trafford work and a viable option for a number of years. If you can do that, then please do, because I personally would love to see Old Trafford still be where Manchester United are long into the future. But I mean, I'm not sure whether it was the right way to go about things in terms of it felt inevitable, the backlash that would get from other fans of northern football clubs, because of course that's not going to be something they're going to be on board with. So I don't know whether it was necessarily the right way of building it up, of saying, oh, it's the Wembley of the North, we're all going to come together on this. It's like, well, that's not going to happen. But yeah, I mean, on the new stadium thing in general, I think it's sort of, I know obviously Newcastle United fans will probably be grappling with a similar situation really, but I would always say that if it's possible to refurbish the stadium and keep it what it is, because I mean, St James's Park, when you walk through the city centre, it's an incredible sight. Like it's amazing to see. It's one of those places that kind of, if it ever was to go, it would feel wrong, I think. And I think Old Trafford's similar, where it's sort of when you look at it over the river, it kind of has that sort of that lasting impression. And I think if they were to get rid of Old Trafford, it would be they should only do it if it's absolutely necessary, I think, would be my take on that.
And do it without my taxes, please.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
How will Man United approach this game in terms of having the ball? Are they wanting to have the ball more than Newcastle, or will they give the ball to Newcastle and say, you come on to us, show us what you can do? Because I think Newcastle are probably best on the transition, on the counter. So how will Man United play?
Well, I mean, I think that obviously Ten Hag's when he came in, is one of his main missions, what he said was that he wanted to make Manchester United the best transition team in the world. And obviously that has been, I'd say that's been far from successful to this point. But I mean, in terms of the way Manchester United play, it's hard sometimes to see an identity. I think the fact that they can be so up and down on a game by game basis, I would say that there's definitely a sort of an onus on that, with the pace of the likes of Garnacho and Amad Diallo. I could see maybe starting, obviously depending on if Rashford's available, but they're both very, very fast players, and I think obviously having those two on either sides would suggest an onus on the transition. And Højlund as well up front, I mean, he's deceptively quick. But I think it's one of those where, again, like I've said multiple times today, without Bruno Fernandes, that really changes everything. On the transition, he is the player that unlocks the defense and picks that one really important pass. And I think if you don't have him, obviously we have someone like Christian Eriksen, but he has been ineffectual this season, really, in terms of the way he's played. So I think I would say that it could be a very end-to-end game, in terms of the fact that Manchester United aren't particularly great at keeping the ball at the best of times. So I think if they were to try and do that against Newcastle, then they could get picked off because of how high Newcastle tend to press. So I think it could end up being end-to-end, and it's one of those where who will be taking the chances, really, because I can't see it being a game without a lot of chances, is what I would say. So I think it's my guess of how the game will play out would be that it'll be very end-to-end and transition-based, but just because of the fact that Manchester United don't have their best ball-playing defenders. They might not have Bruno Fernandes. They might not have Casemiro playing in his right position, which is very important, I think, for us keeping the ball. So I think from that side of things, I can't see it being a game where Manchester United try and keep possession and suck the life out of the game, just because of the fact that that's not something they're great at doing, especially not with their best players available.
Yeah, the midfield battle will be key, and the pace of maybe Anthony Gordon or Jacob Murphy will also play a huge part in it. Before I get your prediction for the game, Owen, just talk to me about a player that you're really fearing. Let's say Isak is fit, for example. You can get Isak, and then you've got Bruno. I've just mentioned Murphy or Gordon there. Is there a player that stands out for you?
It probably would be Gordon. I mean, considering what he did, there was the last game at St James's Park when it was Gordon's goal that won it against Man United, and that was another one where he just seems to be getting better and better. And it's one of those where there was a lot of talk about whether it was a good signing at the time, and it really, I mean, that's sort of that feels like that's completely changed in terms of the way that kind of. The way that he's just took to the game, the way that Howe's implemented him and kind of got him in. Obviously, I know there was even the talk when Alan St-Maximin left originally, whether that would be something that Newcastle would regret. But I mean, he's come in and sort of and been a really good replacement for him, and already looks like he might be exceeding him in terms of that end product. I mean, that was always something that St-Maximin, it felt like, struggled with at times, was the assists and the goals. And I mean, Gordon's already getting them in droves. So he would be the one that I would say, maybe if he's in the middle, obviously coming up against Johnny Evans with his lack of pace, I think could be an issue. But even coming from out wide, we've had a bit of a mix of whether it's Wan-Bissaka or Dalot who plays left back. I would say in this game you want a Wan-Bissaka on Gordon potentially.
So Gordon would probably be on the left wing if there's a striker. So who
I would say I'd probably want, if that was me, I'd want Wan-Bissaka there.
Right.
Yeah, I would say so, just because of that one-on-one. He's better at one-on-one defending. I think Dalot's a better footballer, but I think Wan-Bissaka, if you just say to him stop Gordon, then he's be the best sort of equipped to do that. But I think, to be fair, if he is able to isolate Wan-Bissaka and is able to sort of obviously have other Newcastle players around him to play the ball off, then I think we could be in trouble with him, just because of he feels like he's been that shining light really this season for Newcastle. He's definitely a worry, I would say, from a Man United.
Well, that's good to hear. In double figures for both assists and goals this season. Just briefly, the biggest weakness that Newcastle can exploit?
I mean, maybe earlier in the season I would have said Andre Onana, but I think more often than not, he seems to be having all right games this season. I mean, there's the odd mistake creeps in, but I wouldn't say him. I would just say, to be honest, probably the pace in that back two, in the centre backs. I mean, and also obviously the fact that if Casemiro is playing there, his positional sense and that. I mean, that was the main problem with that Arsenal goal, was that he just didn't go with the rest of the defence, and he was left obviously playing. He was playing. I can't remember exactly who it was, but obviously it ended up with Trossard scoring. But yeah, he was playing the Arsenal player onside, and it's one of those, I think, where it'll come down to if Isak, for example, is able to run onto a ball over the top, we're not catching him. We're not going to be able to catch him. Or if Gordon is able to isolate a fullback and get past him, and then he's one-on-one with a Casemiro or with an Evans, then I think we're going to struggle. So I'd say it's potentially that lack of, as good of a defender as Johnny Evans is from a sort of practical point of view, winning headers and things like that. I just think it's the lack of pace in that back line. And also, just like I said, the Casemiro factor of just like the positional sense and not always looking like he knows where he is when he's playing in defence. I mean, that's such a huge thing.
And could this be Ten Hag's last game at Old Trafford? Will he be in charge next season?
I would like to think that, because I mean, again, this is something I've been thinking about a lot, and it's one of those where I think I've been looking at the other options potentially, and I think you struggle to get better than him. I think that would be my thinking. You
don't want Gareth Southgate in charge?
I wouldn't be too keen on that, to be completely honest. I mean, we'll see how he does with the Euros. My opinion might change if he helps with bring it home. But yeah, I think it's one of those where. I mean, I looked at obviously Tuchel as a potential option. He's maybe the only one that I've thought he could be viable. But I think in terms of Ten Hag, I would still be leaning more towards give him a transfer window, give him a chance. You don't always want to go for those kind of like split-second managerial changes as soon as new ownership comes in, because that doesn't always go to plan. I think it rarely goes to plan, really. So in terms of that, I would be more inclined to keep him at the moment. Obviously, that could change depending on what happens. If we get beat badly in these next 3 games, get hammered in the cup final, maybe then I think it might get to the point where it's not viable to keep him. But I would say I'm erring on the side of Ten Hag in at the moment, at least. But I would say it's maybe 60-40 at most. I'm not very much not convinced, if that makes sense.
And we'll get the prediction in a moment, I promise you. But final question, I promise you it is.
No problem.
You watched Gate says over the weekend.
Yep.
Dejon Brown up top, Derby player on loan. He has been linked to Newcastle United. BBC Radio Newcastle's Matthew Raisbeck was on this podcast a few weeks ago and said Newcastle should go after him because he's seen no one like him at the age of 18. Could he do a job for Newcastle? It's
one of those. I think that game was interesting because he was up against your sort of typical National League defence of two big centre-backs who were, at times it looked like he sort of wasn't quite there in terms of the strength aspect of it, which I think is fair enough. He's 18. I mean, you can't expect that much from him from that perspective. I mean, I'm sure he's still growing. He could still get stronger. But I think just looking at kind of his technical ability, he did look a step above anyone else on that pitch on the day. And I think the big thing that sort of came to me was the composure that he had to take the winning penalty. I mean, at 18 years old, to sort of step up in that situation when you've seen, I think, 4 or 5 players miss penalties at that point. I think it ended up being like 5-4, but it was sort of there'd been like 8 penalties each taken by each team. So he had already seen players go up and not be successful. And I think it really shows his character, which I think might be the key thing that helps him succeed at a higher level. And obviously, I mean, he's going back to Derby. I think it's one of those where he could potentially, excuse me, you could potentially see him in League One. I think he definitely feels like he could make that step up even just next season. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those where I think the next year or so will be key in terms of seeing where his level will be. But I mean, I could certainly understand Championship clubs and Premier League clubs like Newcastle taking a look at him and thinking maybe this is something that we could explore, just because, like you said, he's 18 and he looks levels above where he is currently.
Derby actually will be in the Championship next season.
So that would be
a good platform for him to
definitely
see if the real
if
deal.
he's there for them.
One to watch, maybe. Come on then, score prediction. How's it going to go between Manchester United and Newcastle United?
So I would say that there'll be goals. I think. I mean, I can't see Newcastle not scoring. I like to think Man United will be able to score at home. Obviously, like I said, especially if we have Bruno back, if we have Rashford back, that would be really important. But I think I'm going to say, if I was to give you sort of my tentative prediction, I'd say maybe a 2-2 or something like that. But I mean, I'd hope for a win. I'd hope for maybe a 2-1, or I can see it being one of those games where there's a lot of chances and it's down to which team takes more of them. So I mean, maybe even a 3-2 or something like that. But going into it positively, I'd say maybe a 1-goal Manchester United win. But if I'm being more realistic with myself, I'd say a draw would maybe feel like a result that we could. That I could expect, and I wouldn't be overly surprised by, to be honest.
And that wouldn't be good enough for Manchester United to finish above Newcastle. That would confirm Newcastle as a place above the Red Devils. So I think fans would take a point, but I think they'll be looking for all three. I'm going to go for a win for Newcastle United. I think they will step up to the plate when it matters. Thank you, Owen, for your debut on Everything.
No problem. Yeah, thank you.
We've enjoyed it.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
To you guys watching and listening, thank you very much for tuning in as always. Give us a like, give us a thumbs up on YouTube, give us a rating and review on the audio platform. Head over to chroniclelive.co.uk for all the latest Newcastle United news. And for myself, I'll see you